grassroots organization whose mission is to promote and defend the great American principles of individual liberty, constitutional government, free markets, sound money, and a non-interventionist foreign policy, by the way of political activity and education. So tonight, primarily what we're going to be talking about is education. All right, we got one segment that's not on the agenda tonight. We have some visitors that are putting together some information on the Conowingo scandal. So we have Thomas and Matthew LaCastro. It's going to give you just a teaser. We're going to be covering the rain tax either in September or October, and we're going to have some speakers come down about that. This is going to dovetail into that. We're going to have them back to talk more about this, but I just wanted to give them a couple minutes here to let you know what they're working on.
Hi, I'm Matthew.
I'm Thomas.
So what we're doing right now is we're putting together a crowdfunding campaign for a documentary, and it's on the Conowingo scandal, as you mentioned. So this is going to be kind of two parts. I'm going to talk about the Conowingo Dam as an environmental problem, and then my brother is going to talk about the scandal and why this major source of pollution has not been addressed. So if you look at the Bay cleanup currently, Maryland's sources of pollution, local sources of pollution, only account for 20% of sediment, phosphorus, and nitrogen, which are the major key things that we look at in water quality and pollution. So we account for 20% of the pollution. So most of the pollution running to the bay is actually coming from upstream, and it all funnels down right in past the Conowingo Dam. And what it acts as is a major stormwater pond, 8,500 acres, where over the past 80 years it's collected 2 million tons of sediment a year. So it's a trapping effect. So the water comes, it stops at the dam, and it settles out. And if you go online tonight and you look at the Conowingo scandal, we have a great animation that describes this problem. It makes it very simple to understand.
If we had sound, we would have shown it.
We would have shown it to you tonight. So it causes it to fall out, and then when storms come by, so now it can't trap anymore. We've reached the trapping capacity. So sediment is freely coming in with phosphorus, blanketing the bay. It covers and smothers oysters, submerged aquatic vegetation. So we have this major point source of pollution that's just not being addressed. And then you kind of start wondering, well, why hasn't it been talked about? The bay cleanup, that's something everyone can get behind. So why isn't it being talked about? And it's kind of this paradox, because whenever somebody brings up the Conowingo Dam, people are on one side or the other. Anyone who brings up the Conowingo Dam is viewed as against fixing the bay. They're viewed as against fixing local sources of pollution in Maryland. Meanwhile, the people like the Chesapeake Bay Foundation aren't addressing this major problem. And this is kind of where...
Yeah, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, for some reason, and other groups are afraid that if we address this problem, no one will want to pay attention to septics or the rain tax or things like that. So, first, follow the money, right? The Chesapeake Bay Foundation has gotten money from Exelon. They've given, so Martin O'Malley is the head of the Democratic Governors Association, and Exelon gave the Democratic Governors Association $150,000. They've given the Democratic Party thousands of dollars in Maryland. They've given a slew of candidates, on both sides, to be honest, money. This is just their tactic, and their tactic, for whatever reason, is just to hush up the issue. Probably the most newsworthy thing that we found out was the Chesapeake Bay Foundation has $4.6 million in Cayman Island accounts. I have never met someone who knew that. I think we definitely broke that, because everyone's always shocked. That's usually the jaw dropper. Why do they have that? We've heard a lot of things. But we're not ready to go on record to say why they have that. But the fact is, I'm pretty sure when we donated our $50, we were pretty sure that it wasn't going to a Cayman Island account. So, unfortunately, it's completely polarizing right now. And what we know is that this is actually a bipartisan issue. Because this past session in the Maryland House, in the Maryland Senate, every single Democrat and Republican voted for a resolution to get Congress to address the sediment buildup behind the Conowingo Dam. But for whatever reason, when this resolution got to the state House of Delegates, Maggie McIntosh, who's heralded this as this huge environmentalist, who just of January 2013 was put in charge of Bay cleanup and was going to be the person to address the Conowingo Dam, she actually killed this resolution. She gave it a desk drawer veto. She never let it come to life, even though every Democrat and Republican had just voted for it. So these are all things that we're addressing. Again, this is called the Conowingo scandal. If you put it in Google, it'll pop right up. We're going to hopefully get an email out to everybody here with a link to the Indiegogo page. But what we put together was just 7.5 minutes of what we found. We just learned about it July 11th, and we've been working nonstop to put this out because September 1st is a really important day. And that's what we're doing in this Indiegogo campaign. We're advocating people actually not donate to us to make the documentary. We're advocating people, if they can only do one thing, go ahead and call this congressmen and senators who we've listed. In doing that, we're asking people to advocate for a 1-year relicensing of this dam instead of a 46-year license. Because currently, FERC, this is the governmental body that would be issuing this license, is going to give the dam operator, Exelon, a 46-year license with no stipulations on management of this 14-mile sediment pond behind the dam. Now, we're not saying that this should be the responsibility of Exelon, the power company. I mean, it's not their mud, right? It's everything in Pennsylvania and New York. But the thing is how can we give a 46-year license with no stipulations on management? It's just insane.
And the solution is just dredging behind the dam, regaining trapping capacity. Since we've reached trapping capacity, we've had 250% increase in sediment, 70% increase in phosphorus. So the largest point source of pollution, the place that we can have the most economically efficient impact, is just completely being ignored. And the reason is people getting
and Exelon's
paid off.
They have spent $15 million on this relicense. They've spent $15 million. So we're throwing a big monkey wrench in this. And the thing is, why are we doing it? Because if we had another hurricane like we did in 1972, Hurricane Agnes, if we had that today, we would just decimate the Chesapeake Bay. Because back then, if we interview 10 people, you'll see them in this trailer we put together. All these watermen say the same thing. After that, the bay was never the same. Now, if that were to happen today, something of that intensity, and with all of this legacy sediment, dozens and dozens of feet being put into the Chesapeake Bay, well, that would be it for the bay. Because back in '72, we didn't have this legacy sediment. So it's a pressing matter.
Tomorrow, we've been talking with the reporter. We're actually going to get national press on the issue. We hope it's going to be published tomorrow. So we could actually use your support. So far, we've already raised $2,200 towards the documentary. So if you guys
sharing it on Facebook,
and then really, if you can make a donation tonight, it would mean the world to us, just in showing momentum and that this is a serious issue. $1, $5, $10, any amount that you give to us, we'll then give you a free copy of the documentary after it's produced. So the Conomingo scandal, Google that; it'll pop right up, and you'll learn more about this in detail.
Hopefully, we'll be back to talk more detail.
I saw that on the internet. You guys did an excellent job on that.
Thank you so much.
One thing about this resolution, both parties voted to clean up behind the Conomingo Dam. That obviously smells like a setup. I mean, the setup was we're all going to vote for it so we can tell our constituents we voted for it, and then we know that Maggie McIntosh is going to kill it.
And on the other side, it's played with Conway. Yes,
that's just a con.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
it does go to show that it is an issue, because I mean, if they're all voting for it, they acknowledge that it is an issue. It's just they're not ready to address it. They'd rather focus on these sensational, measures like septic remediation. Yes.
I've been on the air on a couple of local radio shows talking about this, and unfortunately, two guys who you have who were in the House and Senate, E.J. Pipkin and Mike Schmiegel, have both. One left the state, the other was voted out of office. So
yeah.
I don't know who your hero is in the GA, but I would advise to find a new one real quick. But
yeah.
Isn't there supposed to be 120 feet behind the dam of clear space? Now it's like down to 10 feet.
Okay, so
yes,
because
it was under 20 feet. Now it's 14.
But this is
14,
This is why we figured we had to make an animation to clearly depict this, because it's confusing. There is space right behind the dam because the water's constantly flowing to the bottom where it goes through turbines. It's just that before that, it
14
goes up
miles
like this.
long. It's called the Conomingo Pond, stretching back. There's been a buildup. It was 120 feet deep. It filled up with sediment. So all you have to do is keep dredging this out and maintain space so that you can keep trapping it. And you know that anything that you take out of this pond won't be going into the bay. So we're spending $1 billion in the last decade. We're about to spend another $1 billion
on just
in the
dredging.
coming year, dredging the upper channels of the bay to keep the Port of Baltimore viable. Why wouldn't you go right above the dam where it's all trapped in one place and prevent it from coming down and covering the oyster and the
And we just, the thing that's so silly is we feel like this was Exelon's time to shine. With all the money that they're spending, and there's a lot more we're uncovering, they could have just said, well, we're going to fix this issue, or at least lobby to get other people to help us fix the issue, and then they look like champions of the bay. But what they're doing is just deciding to not talk about it. I mean, we can't even reach them. No one wants to talk about it. And we're not coming after them personally, we think it's everyone's responsibility, but we think that's unfortunate.
You said it's the biggest point source of pollution, which makes sense because the Susquehanna River is the biggest contributor.
50% of
to
fresh
the
water
entire
coming into the
watershed, if not more. I thought it was, you just said 50?
50% of the fresh water, so
Yeah.
it's 80% of the pollution, 50% of the fresh water,
I
all
think
comes
it's,
through
I
that
think it's more
dam.
than 50%. But anyway, nonetheless, over time, if that dam wasn't there, the same amount of pollution would have gotten into the bay. So my question is, would it have disseminated differently? Because obviously there's going to be, you've got 14 miles of sediment that's been backed up. In one venue, it sounds like the dam was a good thing.
It is, we say that in the video.
Okay, now, I'm not disagreeing, I'm just trying to, try to.
No, we're
comprehend.
agreeing, so what we call is the guardian of the bay, that's what we call the dam.
Your point, if the dam wasn't there, you would have had even, so it would have come out evenly, and it would be bad.
No, I don't know that it would be better, but the point is that it's a good way to compile just what the contributory factors are. But there is this aspect, I'm not defending them,
Mhm.
and you're dumping it on the owner of the person that was contributing one good thing, and it sounds like they've kept 14, or how many years has the dam been there, of pollution out of the
Yeah,
bay.
we agree.
I'm not saying you don't, I'm just saying that's where I am at following you, I just wanted to see,
Mhm.
okay, that's all.
And it's also, it's actually worse than if the dam wasn't there, because what happens is the sand falls out easier than the clay and the mud, so actually you are sifting out, and what you're getting coming into the bay is worse than if the dam wasn't there itself. Plus, now that there's a buildup, what we're talking about with
It's
Tropical
organic.
Storm Lee, so 19 million tons of sediment were thrust into the bay after
Just with the Tropical
Storm Lee. 4 million tons were scoured from this buildup of sediment. So obviously the majority is from the upstate, the upstate part of the watershed is the main issue. But an extra 4 million tons was scoured out and dug out and thrust into the bay because nobody has
And
addressed
this
it.
is why we wish we could get through to Exelon, because they are great. I mean, honestly, this dam is great. It's been a major guardian of the Chesapeake Bay, but it's completely lost that. It's no longer a guardian.
And the
Because we've
current way, the models, the TMDL, the total maximum daily loads, are how we model what's happening with pollution. The pollution diet is things that come through the rain tax, the water sanitation plan. It's all assuming that the trapping capacity would exist out to 2025. But that's not true. That trapping capacity is gone. So all the current models for pollution reduction don't take into account the fact that we've had a 250% increase in sediment, 7% increase in phosphorus, 2% increase in
I'll just tell you this real quick. I just ran my boat from Chrisfield to Middle River yesterday. And when you get to Thomas Point, your prop wash is completely different looking. It's disgusting.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
tell them.
Thank you
Great.
so much.
I like that. We have Ann Miller from the Baltimore County Coalition for Education Oversight. She is the founder. If you've been following her on Facebook at all, you've been seeing that she's been doing these presentations around the county for several months now.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited. I got, this whole Common Core thing came up. I promise not to steal your thunder here. But just to give you a little personal note, as the tax cap's going around, because I don't want you to be distracted while Ann's up here. When I found out this Common Core, so I started reading about what it was and more about it, and it was really like the tip of the iceberg. And so the more I researched out education, I have an 8-year-old daughter. I started reading all these books, and I was like, oh my gosh, the education system is just structurally flawed. And Common Core was introduced in 2nd grade last year in my daughter's school. She goes to Sparks Elementary. And she was so frustrated with her math and reading homework, and we're trying to help her, and I'm looking at this stuff going, this is ridiculous. You should not be doing math like this. Let me show you how to do it right. And I'm teaching her. I have an engineering degree, so math, 2nd grade math, I'll tell you I can do that. So I'm explaining how to do it. She's like, oh yeah, that's a lot easier, but we're not allowed to do it that way. I'm like, well, why not? She's like, because they'll tell us that it's wrong. We have to draw the 68 circles across our paper. I'm like, this isn't going to work. And then she got reading homework, and it was like these races. So for 1st grade, they're learning how to read, right? Like words, okay? 2nd grade, they do these races response. They have to read this like story, and then they have to write an essay. An essay in 2nd grade. They don't know what a subject, predicate, proper punctuation. They're still learning this stuff. She has no idea how to do this, and we're trying to help her, and I couldn't figure it out. So we had a meeting with the teachers, sit down, talked about their, the way they're handling her and some of this curriculum, and there's nothing they can do. They're getting this material, weeks before they're sharing it with my daughter. So anyway, the bottom line is, my wife and I had a very deep conversation. I grew up in public schools. I never crossed my mind to consider private schools, and it wasn't even the realm of possibility of homeschooling. But we have pulled our daughter out of school, and we are homeschooling her next year. So, and this wouldn't have been possible. Now, what I realize is that's not an option for a lot of people. I'm fortunate enough that my wife can be home, and she doesn't have to work. But a lot of people don't have that choice. And so the reason we're fighting this issue is because I realize that. And we need to fix the school system because it is structurally broken. So I'm very excited to have Ann come in and talk about this. It's just the tip of the iceberg. And I ask you to give her attention. Ann, what's going on?
Thank you very much, Larry, and thank you so much for having me this evening. Tonight, of course, I'm going to be talking about Common Core and really the bigger picture of education reform in Maryland. Because you can't just talk about Common Core. It's a very complex issue, and it's got tentacles all over the place. So I do take a bigger look at education reform in Maryland and some of the issues with the processes. We founded the BCCEO, the Baltimore County Coalition for Education Oversight. Really, it started in response to the arrest of Robert Small here in Baltimore County, a parent who was arrested at a school board meeting for speaking out of turn. And at the end of that meeting, a group of parents, we stood around and we were a bit shocked at what had occurred, and it was a major red flag for us. So we decided we really need citizen oversight of our public education system. And we started meeting, and we've just been growing, speaking to people one-on-one in group situations like this, and just slowly growing our group. But we are a group of citizens, parents, teachers. We span the political spectrum from far left to far right and everything in between. If you want to check out our website, we do have a website with a lot of other information on it, and it'll help you keep in touch with what's going on. One of the first actions that our group took back in December was we sent an email out to Baltimore County teachers across the county. And it was a letter of support. And in that letter, we listed our purposes. And even TABCO agreed with all of our purposes here. And I think they're really representative of this battle, not just in Baltimore County, but statewide and even nationally to a big degree. So I'm just going to quickly go through what our purposes are. To protect our children from a barrage of unproven education reforms, support teachers through disastrous implementation issues, retain good teachers in our county despite warnings of a mass exodus this year, and those warnings come from TABCO. Safeguard our children's and families' privacy, spare our children from excessive assessments that have little value, eliminate the tying of teachers' evaluations to kids' test scores. That's new this year as well. In the past, teachers were evaluated based on peer and principal review. So this is really the ultimate teaching to the test. Assert our local school system's autonomy by withdrawing support for these reforms instead of piling more on before the issues have been resolved. Demand accountability for the waste of millions of county dollars. Move to a fully elected school board, and we're on our way at least for that. Demand that parents and teachers have a voice in advance of the reforms rather than finding out about them when they're being implemented. So tonight, like I said, I'm going to talk about the big picture of education reform in Maryland. We're going to drill in and look at some of the details, and then finally what we as citizens and as a state can do to address these problems. What I'm not going to do is talk about the standards themselves or the curriculum. I'm not an education professional. There's a lot on both sides, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that you can find. And so I don't get into that. I think it's more important that we really look at the bigger issues behind it. So first, what is Common Core? Simply, it's a set of education standards of what kids need to know at what grade level. And if you read the standards themselves, they might look benign. I couldn't read the standards and tell you what's good and whether they're good or bad myself. But there's a whole lot more behind that, and it's a much broader issue than just the standards themselves. So when we talk about implementing Common Core, you don't just implement the standards and that's it. It comes with a whole package, a whole implementation package. So those things include new curriculum and lesson plans, texts and instructional materials, the new PARC assessments, teacher training and professional development, student data collection, and of course all of the funding to implement these things. So now we're going to talk about the big picture here in Maryland. What we're seeing when we look at the implementation of Common Core, its development, who's pushing it, is we see this kind of strange bedfellows grouping of entities that you wouldn't normally expect to be together, and that is not only Fed Ed, the USDE, but corporate interests who tend to benefit from these reforms, and then also the nonprofit side. So we're seeing it being pushed and fronted by nonprofits. Where did Common Core originate? At the top of the list, it's got to be the Gates Foundation here. But there are a lot of entities. Most of these are either pseudo-governmental entities or nonprofits and foundations. The Gates Foundation funded almost all of these in some form or another to push Common Core, develop it, and implement it. So the point here is to, first of all, show that this is not a state-led initiative. And second, so that you can begin to see these symbiotic relationships and recognize them. So how did Common Core come about in Maryland? First, they were funded by federal education grants. There were other incentives for the states to sign on, and they required enabling legislation on the federal, state, and local levels. And it required not only the state school boards to sign on, but also the local boards as well. So the federal funding really started with the stimulus bill. In the stimulus bill, there was a very large allotment to the tune of $93.6 billion for education grants. Now the one you've heard most of is the race to the top, which is really only a small portion of that at $4.3 billion. But look at all the havoc that's creating already, and it's only a small portion of what's been allotted in the ARRA. When Maryland signed on to Common Core, we received $250 million to sign on, and half of that went to the counties that signed on as well. Baltimore County's portion was $17 million, and we'll talk about these numbers a little bit more, but just keep those in mind. Baltimore County was $17 million. Some of the other incentives for states to sign on were waivers from the No Child Left Behind Act, so some of the more stringent requirements were waived. And also Title I funding incentives to the tune of $15 billion. I have a handout here, which is this screen. It's on the table over there, I think, or it was. So please be sure and pick this up. When we talk about Common Core, really Common Core was just the first of a whole slew of education reforms coming from the federal level that Maryland has or is in the process of adopting. Common Core was just the first one to wake us up. Your homework, if you don't know what some of these mean, you need to start looking at these because it goes way beyond Common Core, and they're all starting to intermingle to where we can't tell one from another. So for instance, Common Core, they're renaming the college and career readiness standards. So that's a whole other reform, is the college and career readiness, but they're all really interwoven. The common denominator for all of these reforms is student data collection, and we'll be talking a lot about that tonight. I mentioned the enabling legislation that allowed that to pave the way really for implementation of Common Core. On the federal level, a lot of things occurred leading up to it. We talked about the stimulus bill. We will talk a little bit more about how FERPA was amended. A slew of things occurred. This is only a few things here. On the Maryland level, it's even more. This is just a few of them. I have a more comprehensive list if you're really interested in getting into the nitty-gritty. I write on examiner.com, and I wrote about all of what occurred in Maryland leading up to this. But one of the requirements for application to Race to the Top was that the states could not have any impediments to implementation of Common Core, either statutory or regulatory. So you see this flurry of activity legislatively in 2010, right before we applied for Race to the Top. All the states signed on before the final draft of the standards were released. The deadline for application to Race to the Top was one day before the final draft was released. So it's yet another example of you got to sign it to see what's in it. All right, some issues with the reform process. We've got some problems with how education reform occurs in Maryland. And if we don't deal with it with Common Core, we're going to deal it with the next reform and the next all the way down the line. So some of the issues are that the MSDE, the Maryland State Department of Education, makes changes through regulation, and so it doesn't go through the formal legislative review that you get for bills. So for instance, our legislators authorize the MSDE to set regulation, and then they do it, and it's not like you get double votes, multiple votes and hearings and public input and all of that. It's almost blind. So, and the problem additionally is that the MSDE is a fully appointed board. So if they set regulation that we don't agree with, we can't fire them.
And could you tell us what MSDE stands for again?
Maryland State Department of Education.
Okay, thanks.
Also, the MSDE has the largest chunk of the Maryland budget. It is at 36% of the Maryland budget. Now, that's not just K through 12, that also includes post-secondary, but it is huge, $13.5 billion. And despite what you hear, the local boards really have very limited autonomy. Essentially, MSDE sets the regulations, and the local boards have to comply. So one of the big things you hear a lot about is this loss of local control. In 2009, when the Race to the Top was offered, it was well known that the state's education departments really were struggling financially. So this was, an expedient answer. Yes. The problem is that those grants come with grant requirements. Those requirements have implementation costs associated with them, and before you know it, you're right back to budget shortfalls. So what do? you apply for another Fed Ed grant. And we're seeing that in Baltimore County. You didn't have just the big Race to the Top grant, you also have district level grants. So the local boards can apply for more Race to the Top, and I believe Baltimore County has already applied for 2 district level Race to the Top grants since the big one. So that loss of local control, it wasn't just this one-time thing, that we applied for this and all of a sudden we lost control. We lost a lot of control, but we're not done yet, because every time we reapply, we're losing more and more. So it's an ongoing thing. So that's kind of the big picture very briefly. We're going to drill down now and talk about some of the details. We talked about the money. So it begs the question, how do we know then that we're even going to come out ahead after we've implemented this? There were never any good projections done on what the final implementation costs were going to be. We're still not done. We don't know. So we can only look at it, as it goes forward. In January, the MSD announced that they were going to need $100 million in technology upgrades to implement the online park exams. Now remember, MSDE received $250 million. This is just one little aspect of implementation, $100 million right there. These other items have to do with Baltimore County specifically. BCPS contracted EdCount to write the language arts curriculum for $5.4 million. It turned out in the end that it was never in any kind of usable form, so they ended up paying money for teachers to write the curriculum, and they had already purchased texts and materials to go along with what EdCount was supposed to do. So now all those texts are sitting on shelves gathering dust. The next one, $10 million was spent by BCPS on the Wonder Reading series. For reasons that I don't know, teachers are only allowed to use some of those materials. Are there any teachers in the room? I know there are a couple.
Both my
that want to
parents are.
admit. What's that?
Both my parents are. My father was president of TABCO, 65, 66. I hear about this stuff all the time. My stepmother teaches principalship class. She's a professor.
Yeah, I like to get teacher input. They can either back up what I'm saying or give us more information.
They moved out of the state. They've had enough of Maryland. They moved to the Republic of Texas.
Everybody's moving to Texas. They're going to just corral us in one state, and then we'll be easy prey at that point. So on the Wonder Reading series, again, the teachers were paid ultimately to write those units. You might have heard of the controversy with the Soups Academy with Dallas Dance. $895,000 was spent by our county on the Soups Academy in, guess where, Chicago. It was a program to coach school principals, and it's only going to coach 75 principals. So that amounts to $12,000 per principal. And in Chicago, they were complaining about the lack of quality of this program. They had principals not even showing up for it. So here we're looking at a lot of money. Remember what Baltimore County got? $17 million. I mentioned some of the other things that occurred on the federal level. The USDE made changes to FERPA in January of 2012. FERPA is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, intended to safeguard students' identities and privacy and data. They made that change, in their words, to allow for the effective use of data. So it was to pave the way for all of the data collection that was going to be occurring under these Race to the Top reforms. not only did they change who data could be shared with, but how. So it no longer requires express legal authority. So essentially they gutted FERPA. And you'll hear the MSDE tell us, you don't need to worry about your students' data because we can't violate FERPA. Well, they hardly have to anymore. Another protection on the federal level is the PPRA, the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment. This is a good federal statute. It allows parents to be able to view instructional materials. It requires parental consent for required federal surveys that include sensitive, gathering of sensitive information. That would include political, psychological, sexual, admitting to illegal behaviors, critical appraisals of your family, anything regarding privileged relationships, income, etc. This is a good protection. The problem is that it only covers required federal surveys, and the key word here is required. There's a survey that has been conducted for 3 years now in Maryland. It's the MDS3, Maryland Safe and Supportive Schools, and it gathers this type of information. The problem is the PPRA does not cover this because they only need 40% participation rate to renew the grant. So they don't have to require it. They just put it in front of our kids and they get their 40%. So there's no protection there. I'll be talking a little bit more about that particular survey. Personally identifiable information. The MSDE is telling us that the information in the Maryland Longitudinal Data System, the MLDS, where they store all of our kids' data now that they're collecting from the school systems, they say it's not personally identifiable, even though it's student-level data, because they're not using the Social Security number, they're using a unique identifier. So if that sets your mind at ease. You have to realize that the MLDS is only one database in a data warehousing system. So you've got databases connecting to it that contain all this personally identifiable information, whether it's workforce data, college data, preschool, medical, all kinds of databases that are merging with this. The bottom line is there's no such thing as student-level data that is not personally identifiable. And my opinion on that, it really is that there's no reason that they should be sharing student-level data outside the school of attendance. If they're going to be doing analysis, they can do it on that aggregated data. Okay, more on enabling legislation. This is on the Maryland level. Can you see this okay, is it? I'm not going to read all of this, but there are some things, I pulled out just a few. There are a few that are worth mentioning here. I will mention this bill established the MLDS as an independent unit of state government. And you can read that to mean that there is no oversight. Another one here, this one allocated funds for colleges to transfer data into the MLDS and limits their liability in the event of breach. So the colleges don't have to be afraid to pass on their data, and we have no one to sue. This one, same thing. Set procedures for colleges and private schools, so you're not safe on the private school level, to transfer student-level data and workforce data into the MLDS and limits their liability in the event of breach. And then here's the College and Career Readiness Act that was passed in 2013. This has a couple of interesting things in it. It established a grant for reduced price meal students who were dual enrolled. So they were high school students who were also taking college courses. And it established a grant to pay for their college courses. The reason this is interesting is that they were taking those college courses because so many kids now need remedial classes just so they can get into college, just so they can apply. This kind of covers the school system's embarrassment here that that's necessary, and it makes us pay for it. Another interesting thing in there that I found was the references here. It requires an annual disclosure of student-level data to legislative services for records shared with the nonprofit Complete College America. So that told me that we are sharing data, student-level data, with this national nonprofit called Complete College America. It turns out that that's founded by the Gates Foundation. So you find a lot of interesting things reading this legislation. That was leading up to the implementation of Common Core. I'm not going to go through these bills. These were ones that were passed this session in 2014 after Common Core had started being implemented. The important thing to note here is there's a couple important things. One, it tells us it's not over yet. Our legislators are plowing forward with more legislation that will enable more reforms, all these other reforms. Even while we're kicking and screaming, they're moving forward. And our legislators that are on our side and have concerns about Common Core, with their right hand they're saying, yeah, I'm going to stop Common Core, and their left hand is signing off on more legislation for more reforms.
Yeah.
They don't realize what they're signing because they don't know these things either, just like we don't know them. They don't recognize them when they read legislation, and they're not even reading legislation. Our job is to start reading that legislation for them.
Our job is also to publish their names, addresses, pictures, and where they live and work.
Well, you might as well just publish all of the General Assembly.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We should do that because they're going to keep doing what they're doing while we talk about it and vote and maybe elect one guy here or there while they're plowing ahead.
They know what they're signing. I wouldn't give them that out. They know what they're
Well,
signing.
some of them know what they're signing.
They all know.
No.
I've spent a lot of time in that
They
list.
don't.
They know.
They
They
don't
just
know.
don't. They want to keep their position, they sign it. They know what they're doing.
We worked with several legislators this session, and they really don't recognize this stuff when they see it. We pointed out to them, and then they pulled their names. They were co-sponsoring stuff. They pulled their names off once they realized. But the important thing is here, you see so many were signed unanimously. And like I say, they just don't realize it. They don't have the time to read all the legislation. They're taking the word of the sponsors, often, on the other side, that is not in agreement with them, just taking their word of, oh, this is a good bill. So we got a big problem here.
Yeah.
What else is important? That's it for that screen. All right, other payoffs and buy-ins for promoting Common Core. The Gates Foundation also funded these entities to promote Common Core. That is the NEA, the AFT, and the National PTA. So when I went and I visited our county PTA, the board, they were in agreement with many of my concerns about Common Core. But they said, we can't do anything about it. We can't speak up because the National PTA signed on to it. So we've got this very heavy top-down decision-making going on, and it completely strips us of any voice. All right, this is a section on Did You Know? Do you know that if the MSDE has their way, your child will be on an electronic device throughout the day, and they're going to come home and do their homework on it, and everything that they do will be tracked. Now, these are the same kind of electronic devices that we spend all our time as parents trying to get our kids off of.
Yeah.
You know, they used to say no more than 2 hours of screen time. We're not hearing that anymore. There's no more concern about our kids' eyesight. There's no more concern about possible links to ADD, etc. We talked about this. If there's a breach of the MLDS, legislation already prevents you from suing responsible parties. It's just a matter of time. There's already been 2 breaches with the University of Maryland just in the past year.
They got
Once-
alumni information too, in addition
Yeah.
to students.
All the way
current
back to
students.
79, I think. Once that's out there, it's out there. You can't get it back. You know, this is our kids. Children are the highest target for identity theft. Did you know that? They're that demographic. Data will be collected in the MLDS on your child from birth through 5 years after college graduation. That's what this birth to workplace reform is, P20W. The P literally stands for prenatal, and the W stands for workplace. So right now, they want to collect from birth till 5 years after you graduate from any state institution, so any college, really. That's putting it in their late 20s at the very least.
Why do they need that information?
Well, their justification is that they need to analyze data for best practices and improve our school system.
That's what China has done with letting you know what you can do with your life after you get a certain age. That's why their gymnasts all start out so young, and they have 1,000 of them, then the next year it's 80 of them, then it's 40, then they call out certain professions all along their career path.
Supports for special needs kids are being reduced or eliminated. We talked about the mass exodus of teachers. We looked at that, and Harford County, I think, was even worse this year. That was in the news recently. There was like 300 teachers left at the end of the year in Harford County. Okay. We got to talk about cloud computing. Not only do we need to worry about the MLDS and unauthorized access to our kids' data, but we need to worry about what's going on in a computer lab at school. In some schools, they're assigning, email addresses to the kids so they can communicate with teachers and other students. And also it allows the kids to work on projects together on software, and they can, collaborate, work on these projects. But everything the kids do in the cloud, in the computer lab, is tracked. It raises a few issues. With the emails, if they're using them to communicate with teachers, it takes parents out of that communication loop. And if suppose Johnny in 5th grade sends an inappropriate email to his buddy, it raises potentially discipline issues. Is that going to follow him throughout his school career? Those kinds of things. More on that, the cloud requires a third-party contractor to administer it. In Maryland, they use primarily Google and Microsoft. Well, those contractors have access to all the data, and they are able to build student profiles, and they can target market to your kid. So, like I said, not only do you have to worry about the unauthorized access to your data, but now we got to worry about who's actually authorized to use it. In those student profiles, it includes such information as age, disabilities, grades, health, location, personal opinions, race, religion, etc. Now, I told you I would talk more about that the MDS3 survey. Did you know that you gave passive consent for the MSDE to administer surveys to middle and high schoolers this spring? And that you have no access to view the survey that your kids took? So the MSDE survey, parents could take it too, and we could take it from the computer at our house in our living room, sign on and take it. The kids, however, we're taking a different version. We don't have access to that. They're only allowed to take it in the computer lab administered by their English teachers. And again, that was not covered by the PPRA, so there was no protection there. So, what can parents do to reclaim control of education? First, let's talk about what Maryland can do. These are just suggestions, possible avenues to pursue. First of all, we could refuse Race to the Top. Remember, Baltimore County got $17 million. The road forward is a whole lot more expensive than the road back. Now, if we decided to reject that, it doesn't mean that we have to reject the standards. We could still independently decide these are good standards, or we want to take certain parts of them. But then we do it on without requirements from the federal government. We do it on our own time schedule. We don't have this implementation rush that we're facing now. There was an analysis done on Mike Schmiegel's bill to reject Common Core. Legislative Services did an analysis. The worst case scenario for Maryland, if we rejected Common Core, was we would lose that $250 million. If you look at it as a percentage of the budget, that's only 1.8% of the Maryland education budget. So it's peanuts, really. And their analysis also said it could actually be as little as only $40 million, because that's what they had projected would still be unspent funds. And that only amounts to less than a third of 1% of the Maryland education budget. Another thing we can do that we talked about was reform the process. We need to change how education reform happens in Maryland. MSDE should not be making Maryland law without legislative review. Those regulations have the force of law. We need to pass legislation on the Maryland level that restates those protections that have been weakened, FERPA, the PPRA, another one is COPPA, and have Maryland laws that restate those. We need to end the intrusive student data collection in the MLDS. And one thing that the Baltimore County Council can do is to prohibit the use of county funds to implement the reforms. Now, what can we as citizens do then? First of all, know your rights. Learn FERPA, the PPRA, COPPA. Learn how to submit a PIA, a Public Information Act request. When I called Baltimore County to find out if my child had taken that survey, I was told I'd have to submit a PIA. So there's a big red flag there for you. But we need to learn how to do those things. We need to read the Comar education article, know what it says. Some parents chose to opt out of assessments for the MSA last year, and now we're facing that with the Park assessments this year. The MSDE is telling parents that they cannot opt out. However, if you read Comar, it doesn't mention it for the parents at all, because Comar only regulates what the requirements of the school system. It doesn't tell us what parents have to do. The reason that this regulation exists at all is that in the past, when they issued some of the standardized tests, there were certain school officials that had selectively excluded some students that they didn't think were going to perform well in order to skew the data. So they passed this regulation saying you have to administer it to all students.
And can you tell people what COMAR stands for, please?
Code of Maryland regulations.
Okay.
So they have to administer it. We can't ask them not to administer it. They can put it in front of our kids, but they can't force a pencil in his hand to take it. Bottom line is, we have to refuse the test. Say, you can administer it, but we are refusing to take it.
Is there any, do we know of any penalty if we tell a child not to take it? Is there a suspended graduation or anything like that?
Well, with the MSA is required for graduation. So they did threaten that, and that could be true with the MSA. But now that's gone, we've got Park. So far, Park has not been, they haven't passed anything yet to require it. I imagine it'll probably come this next session. So that's something we gotta watch, and we gotta fight it.
And
I'm
that's
sorry,
great.
not MSA, HSA.
Yeah, and that's grade to grade graduation, not just final.
Say that
Is
again?
that grade to grade graduation, not just final graduation?
No, final, high school graduation, the HSA. What can we do to protect our kids' identities? Every year, when you put your child starts a new school year, you get that directory information, release form. Opt your kid out of the directory, even though it makes it a little harder to set up play dates. There are protections that will come with that. It prevents them from releasing certain information to some outside parties. On the flip side of that form is the opt-out for telecommunications. Now, that might mean that your kid can't work in the computer lab. So there might be some ramifications you're going to need to consider there. But that's another option. Another thing that I did was I sent a letter to my schools I refused in writing to have my children complete any surveys that included personal information without my express written consent. And those words are important: express, written, and informed consent. To my knowledge, those schools have complied with that.
Because you wouldn't know if they did it.
I might not know, right? We have to be the grassroots, connecting with others in our school district. That's what our group is trying to put parents together based on high school district and developing groups that can work that way. We have to form parent groups either working with our PTAs or apart from them. We have to start attending those board meetings. BCPS, you can sign up to speak. They take 10 speakers, just public input each meeting. It's also live streamed, so you can view any of their meetings. The MSDE does not do that. We need to attend the PTA meetings, not just at your school, but the PTA board meetings in the county. To teachers, if TABCO is not representing you, run for a position. And also, if parents, if the PTA is not representing you, run for a position either on the county or local levels. Our message to the PTA is to remember the P in PTA. We are their sole source of funding, us and the Gates Foundation, that is. We're more than free labor. We care about more than just hospitality tables and fundraisers. We actually want to talk about school issues. Those meetings should be a venue for parents to address their concerns. And they should be training parents on how to get involved in the decision making on the county levels and state levels. We have to turn it around so it's bottom-up decision making rather than the top-down that we have now. We have to become the most powerful lobby affecting education in Baltimore County, or we will continue to be steamrolled. Those making the decisions are light years ahead of us. They know how to work the system. They know the channels of authority. They know how to get it done. We have to start doing our research, learn the facts, learn how to read legislation properly, We have to start testifying in Annapolis and Towson, lobbying our representatives. And our message to our legislators. And I really have empathy for our legislators here. They are afraid. And I want them to be free of that
But they
education
shouldn't be legislators if
card.
they're afraid.
Well, but they are, and that's just fact. We have to put out the message that we don't want them just to pass education bills. We want them to pass good bills, okay, or not pass them at all. We implore them to stop giving carte blanche regulatory authority to the MSDE. That diminishes the power of our legislators and hence the citizens, and it diminishes the power of the local school boards. We will help you read and evaluate legislation and will testify on bills. We'll support candidates that do the right thing rather than the expedient. And we want them to consider our group as a resource to them. I want to ask, I know we've got Sean Quinn here running for governor. Are there any other candidates in the room? Okay, we've got three. Beyond Central Committee, is there other?
County Council.
County Council, that's right.
County executive.
Okay, and I want to thank you guys for coming and having an interest in this topic. It's just really important, and we really need to reach out to our legislators and begin to educate them. And our message to TABCO is to remember the T in TABCO. They serve the teachers, not the board. I'm going to end with some quotes from Baltimore County teachers. I mentioned that we sent that email out to our teachers, and it really resulted in an outpouring from teachers. So this is in their own words. I know I speak for other teachers when I say we all feel powerless when these huge pointless changes come down the pike. There are so many great teachers who are retiring next year because of this stuff. They're fed up. All they want to do is teach. I've been teaching for 21 years, and I'm appalled and disappointed in BCPS. I figured out the plan to close the achievement gap, stifle the GT, and teach to the middle. This one was from a school guidance counselor. I see the direct effects of the many assessments on our children. They're suffering from anxiety and are developing numerous behavior disorders that were not seen before. This has to do with the unreasonable expectations placed on them to do tasks that are beyond their developmental ability. It's upsetting many devoted teachers. I'll be among those BCPS teachers who are retiring this year. I just feel that BCPS has no respect for their teachers, especially those who have, like me, who have years of experience. And I think we're going to see more and more of that, where the experienced teachers are leaving. They're either not being replaced or they're being replaced with newbie teachers who know nothing but Common Core. So we're going to see this downward spiral in the quality of our teachers. All the adaptive special classes are being shut down. These children who are several years below grade level will be pushed back into regular classrooms. No matter how much a teacher varies instruction, she cannot meet the needs of these students. They need a different program. In addition to being a teacher, I have 3 children in the system. I want to curtail the implementation of curriculum that is both poorly written and developmentally inappropriate. It comes down to the fact that we have little input in any decisions being made. And this is a teacher, and we're saying the same thing to parents and citizens. I'm certainly appalled at what is being thrust upon our teachers and our students. Many of the motivating factors for change have been monetary. Our students are not products to be manufactured, not cogs in the process. One size does not fit all. These are very complicated issues, and I think that's why most people just ignore them. But if we continue to do that, then we get what we deserve. And that's really why we are where we are now, is we've ignored. And we've trusted our school system. You know, we don't want to think that we can't trust our school system, but we as citizens have failed in providing that oversight that's